They were more than bandmates. They rode the famous wave from Jersey dive bars to global dominance as brothers in boots. Despite being the lead singer, I never tried it, still taking classes. Something went wrong between platinum records and sold-out tours. And Richie Sambora, he's finally speaking. He hid it for years, until now. What happened behind the glam, grins, and guitar solos? When Richie left, what did Jon Bon Jovi not say? Why is one of rock's most famous duos currently apart? This goes beyond ego and celebrity. The issue is much more personal. Richie's revelations will change how you hear those iconic tunes. Brothers in Jersey rock. Prior to the spotlight, Richie Sambora and Jon Bon Jovi were hard-working rock musicians in New Jersey. Both were raised in working-class Woodbridge and Sayreville, where their grit and determination were shaped. Jon with the Wild Ones and Richie with bands like Message played tiny bars, VFW halls, and backyard shows to pursue a goal nobody believed could come true. They were united by more than ambition. We admired Bruce Springsteen and Led Zeppelin. The 1983 signing of Sambora by Bon Jovi was a turning point. His addition enhanced the music, not just filled a guitar seat. His bluesy, passionate playing and natural affinity with Jon helped shape the band's anthemic Heartland rock sound. They had a great chemistry in early performances at the Fast Lane in Asbury Park. Richie's harmony and arrangement skills matched Jon's powerful radio-friendly vocals, producing a big and personal sound. Their collaboration on cross-generational tunes was successful. Peak, Sambora's talkbox solo, Livin' on a Prayer, Wanted Dead or Alive's dark chords, and I'll Be There for You's heartbreaking honesty are all meticulously created to fit Bon Jovi's style. The band was close off stage with backstage giggles and brotherly spirit on tour. All depicted two people united by trust and struggle. Richie is Jon's earthy escape valve from fame's frenzy in Picture Perfects. However, a silent hierarchy was emerging in that link. Even when they were most united, Jon was already being positioned, designed, or defaulted as the brand's face. Despite co-writing several of the band's singles and providing some of its most recognizable sounds, Richie was usually out of the spotlight. His early years weren't entirely about music, but they stuck to their mission. Two Jersey youngsters found a once-in-a-lifetime beat that took them from neighborhood garages to global stages. As their friendship developed, something even more powerful was quietly developing behind the music. Soul behind the strings. In the mid-1980s, Richie Sambora did more than play guitar for Bon Jovi. He defined the band's sound. His tone, phrasing, and melodic sensibility contrasted with glam metal trends, grounding the band in soulful and timeless music. Sambora combined blues-based emotion with arena rock bravado to create solos and rhythms as dramatic as the lyrics. Technology never defined his stage and studio work. Each solo told a story that deepened the song. At their best, Slippery When Wet and New Jersey were radio-friendly rock masterpieces with substance. Jon Bon Jovi provided vocal force and commercial appeal, but Sambora added warmth, edge, and that unmistakable feel to the tunes. Never Say Goodbye and I'll Be There For You showed his ability to make guitar lines emotional, and his harmonies made every chorus monumental. Richie didn't just accompany, he completed their biggest hits' emotional architecture. Sambora was remarkable for his skill, restraint, and insight. He knew when to keep silent, when to let a solo go, when to harmonize behind Jon's vocals, and when to let his guitar screech. Bon Jovi's atmosphere and texture outweighed any garish production in his most famous songs. Sambora offered subtlety to a band typically portrayed as image over content. Despite its look, the music would have a heart. Critics and musicians credit Sambora with creating Bon Jovi's emotional core, while history has portrayed Jon Bon Jovi as the frontman. The talkbox solo in Livin' on a Prayer symbolized a band that combined showmanship and substance. Sambora's guitar work electrifies Bon Jovi's best-loved songs, reminding us that behind every great voice is a skilled guitarist who knows how to communicate with strings. Cracks appeared beneath Bon Jovi's gloss as they became one of the world's biggest bands. Jon Bon Jovi's emergence as the band's face from the late 80s to the early 2000s went beyond branding. It changed the internal structure. Richie Sambora, formerly a strong creative force and equal partner, felt marginalized in band direction, image, and legacy decisions. Change wasn't immediate or drastic, but rather a gradual loss of influence that put Sambora in an unwelcome situation. He provided background support for a project he started. Pressures from touring and making hits exacerbated the imbalance. The pace was too fast for collaboration or emotional adjustment. Once heavily involved in developing the band's musical vision, Sambora felt his opinion was less important. As he later admitted, being at rehearsals and recordings didn't necessarily mean having a voice. There was a growing gap between the band's onstage juggernaut and its shattered inner workings. It was exacerbated by Sambora's addiction and divorce. He sought stability after becoming weak. The atmosphere no longer comforted this bunch. What hurt most was not what others said or did. His closest friends thought he floated through existence indifferently. When he discussed issues or opinions, he felt rejected or outnumbered. Sambora subsequently explained that the relationship, once thick with accomplishment, was replaced with an insulated hierarchy, making his place feel less secure. This partnership ended quietly, unlike others that would have made headlines, caused conflict, and publicized a divorce. Sambora played the role for years, touring, recording, and performing with the group. However, he had emotionally become distant by then. By 2013, his departure from the band was the result of years of struggling to find healthy ground in a hostile atmosphere. The corrosive pressure gradually broke one of rock's most legendary creative friendships. An unexpected revelation hours before a Bon Jovi gig in Calgary in April 2013 startled fans. Richie Sambora would not perform. The official statement cited personal reasons without a date or explanation, fueling suspicion. As one of the band's most prominent and adored members, Sambora's abrupt departure confused and alarmed fans worldwide. This was once thought to be a brief pause, possibly health or family issues. However, as weeks stretched into months without his return, something deeper was unfolding. Sambora was breaking down privately. Years of touring, artistic conflicts, and aggravation about being sidelined had caused emotional and physical fatigue. In subsequent interviews, including a 2024 New York Post piece, Sambora called the band's environment toxic, saying it had become more of a business than a fraternity. He stated he felt unheard, creatively limited, and spiritually exhausted. More importantly, he listed his daughter Ava as a primary motivation for leaving. He wanted to be with her, anything the band's non-stop schedule prevented. It was so painful that it was worse than the statement itself. Sambora claims he did not hear exactly, but he learnt that Bon Jovi went on tour without him, and that they recruited Phil X online. The sucker gut-punched him. Sambora felt removed without a word after a lifetime of commitment and contribution. He said he disappeared and nobody called. Fans felt something was missing, not just because of the superb fingerwork over harmonies, but because Sambora was the band's soul and heart. Richie finally told his side of the tale, despite Bon Jovi's silence. It took more than one spat to drive her leave. Years of feeling creatively and psychologically underappreciated. His 2024 apologies and words demonstrate that. The disappearing drama involved self-preservation, family, and leaving a location that no longer felt like home. Over fame. One of Richie Sambora's most convincing reasons for leaving Bon Jovi's 2013 Because We Can tour became apparent after his sudden departure. Ava, his daughter. Sambora stated in many interviews, including his 2024 apology in Yahoo and the New York Post, that leaving the band was more about fatherhood than dispute. As his daughter Ava, with Heather Locklear, entered her teens, Sambora realized that his continual touring was straining their connection. He stated, "You can't get those years back, and I didn't want to be her ghost." The strain of fatherhood and international touring was too much for Sambora. Music had brought him fame, money, and legacy, but it had also harmed his personal life. Ava was young and going through a lot, including her parents' high-profile divorce, so Richie knew showing up wasn't an option. It was essential. "I didn't want her to grow up without me," he said. "If I wasn't a decent dad, my rock star status didn't matter." Fans were conflicted. Some called Sambora a traitor for canceling the tour. Others praised his daring and human move to appreciate artists' sacrifices behind the scenes. His definition of leaving isn't as rash as he thought. Instead, personal accountability is carefully explored. Sambora said he didn't leave music a decade later. He refused to abandon his daughter. Sambora believes the greatest legacy won't be on stage today. Instead, it will be his bond with Ava. He boasts in his writings about raising her to be well-educated, artistic, and close. Richie never regretted leaving Bon Jovi, even though it startled fans and changed the band's direction. "But I only get one chance to be her dad," he blurted out. The goodbye may have been personal, but what followed spoke volumes without a word. Media silence, private fallout. Following Richie Sambora's abrupt departure from Bon Jovi in 2013, both he and Jon Bon Jovi maintained a notable silence. There were no heated interviews, no dramatic public feuds, and no official explanation beyond vague references to personal reasons. Yet the lack of words said plenty. According to insiders and longtime observers, the friendship and professional bond between Richie and Jon had already begun to fracture well before the tour. While the band continued to operate publicly as a polished unit, privately, the tension had reached a breaking point. Creative differences, personal disconnection, and growing resentment simmered beneath the surface. One of the most telling signs of the divide was how decision-making evolved within the band. Sambora, once a key contributor to the group's creative process, was being excluded from major discussions. In interviews, he later revealed that toward the end, he felt like a hired gun rather than a founding member. Studio sessions had reportedly become colder, more transactional, and less collaborative. According to his 2024 interview in Yahoo Entertainment, Sambora had reached a point where he no longer felt heard or valued. It stopped feeling like a band, and more like a corporation. Sambora somehow managed to persist in being outwardly silent against Jon or the band for several years despite the growing frustration within him. He would allude to the emotional scar it left on him much later. In recent interviews, only then was he able to describe the situation as being emotionally and creatively draining, stating he felt that the environment had turned toxic. The silent rift was not a dramatic explosion but rather a gradual poisoned erosion of trust and warmth. In a way, that silence must have been even more painful. No closure, just a void. Meanwhile, Jon Bon Jovi has mostly restrained his comments regarding Richie. Over the years he commented on the difficulty of Sambora's departure but never elaborated. He was more concerned about moving the band forward with new guitarist Phil X, rather than dwelling on past conflicts. The allowance of mutual avoidance of public drama spared the dignity of the band's heritage from being compromised, but it also meant that for the next decade, fans kept wondering how one of rock's most historic pairings could meet in such an extremely profound silence. The apology that took a decade. In 2024, over a decade after walking away from Bon Jovi, Richie Sambora finally opened up about his departure in a rare and emotional interview. Speaking candidly to Yahoo Entertainment and the New York Post, Sambora offered a heartfelt apology not only to the fans who had supported him through decades of music, but also directly to Jon Bon Jovi. "I just disappeared, man. I ghosted," he admitted. For the first time, he publicly acknowledged the abruptness of his exit and the confusion it left behind. He expressed regret for how he handled the situation, saying, "I probably should have talked to Jon. I should have explained it better." While taking accountability, Sambora also revealed that his decision wasn't made in isolation or out of ego. It came from years of emotional buildup. He described feeling creatively stifled and increasingly sidelined, saying, "The rift," he explained, "wasn't about one argument, but the culmination of unresolved frustrations." He felt his role in the band had shifted from equal collaborator to background player, even though he had co-written many of Bon Jovi's biggest hits. His decision to leave wasn't meant to burn bridges. It was, in his words, a step towards saving his sanity. The apology marked an important change concerning how fans and even industry colleagues viewed Sambora's exit. For many years, the rumors about some internal tension kept swirling around, but neither side was willing to go into detail about it. In making this public statement, he lent a human dimension to his decision while finally granting some clarity. While he stated that he stood by the choice of family and mental health, he regretted the pain and confusion it caused. His reflections became particularly poignant as he laid bare the moment he realized he had left a lot of people in the dark, and this vulnerability struck a chord among longtime fans. The only clear answer from Bon Jovi specifically concerning the apology would be that he has not done so publicly. He has kept his interviews professional, claiming that a reunion is not realistic, though there is no animosity. Nevertheless, it opened the door for contemplation and healing for SHR, if not reconciliation. Sambora gave closure to a book that had long been left unfinished when he honored both his missteps and the larger issues that contributed to his leaving. Graceful goodbye. Richie Sambora's public apology in 2024 opened a door many fans had long hoped to see cracked open the possibility of a reunion with Jon Bon Jovi. Yet Jon's response was more contemplative than enthusiastic. While he expressed appreciation for Sambora's sentiment and acknowledged their history with sincerity, he was also firm in his direction. There was no bitterness in his voice, just clarity. "We had our run," he told the Sunday Times, a statement that captured the quiet finality of a partnership that had simply outlived its rhythm. It wasn't about anger or blame. It was about evolution. In recent years, Jon has been in the midst of his own transformation. Following a serious health scare involving atrophied vocal cords, he has been candid about the difficulty of returning to performance. His recovery has been slow and meticulous, marked by surgery, silence, and the sobering realization that his voice, the very tool that carried him to global stardom, might never return to full strength. This physical challenge has reshaped how Jon sees the future of the band. There's less bravado now and more thoughtfulness. He's no longer chasing the past. He's simply trying to sustain what still matters. The evolution now extends far beyond the stage. Jon has quite evidently shifted to a more introspective approach, one encouraged by the tone of Forever, a mature chronicle of loss, the costs of emotions, and in general, being in rock and roll for too long. Whereas Jon's present focus is refinement. In terms of the past, the thought of a Sambora reunion may be somewhat appealing to the hearts of the fans, whereas for Jon, it could interfere with the balance he's worked so hard to reclaim. Nostalgia seems to have little interest for him these days. That's secondary for him. There's nothing greater for him today than being in the now. Ultimately, Jon Bon Jovi closing the chapter on Sambora is not about disavowing the past. Instead, it is honoring the past while not being tied to it. When asked, he's typically complimentary about Richie. and has never voiced any hostility, but he's focused on Bon Jovi as it exists today, right now, with new music and new limitations. It's a kind and measured goodbye. Not because he doesn't care, but because he finally understands where he stands. Jon Bon Jovi's current mindset is indicative of a trend among veteran artists, who no longer feel the need to redefine their legacy through reunions, but instead through reinvention and boundary setting. In an era rife with social media nostalgia and reunion culture, from Friends specials to giant band comebacks, it seems harsher than ever for an icon to fly back for sentiment's sake. But Jon's restraint is a different strength, his knowing when not to visit one place or another in his history. "I'm not interested in being a tribute act to myself," he said in a 2023 interview. Would a reunion even work? To the outside world, a Bon Jovi Sambora reunion feels like a rock fairy tale waiting to be written. Two old friends back on stage rekindling the magic that once moved millions. But the reality behind that romantic idea is far more complicated. Time has changed everything, musically, emotionally, and practically. More than a decade has passed since Sambora left the band, and in that time both artists have gone in completely different directions. What worked in 1986 doesn't necessarily work in 2024, and both men seem to understand that, even if fans don't want to. Sambora has spent recent years immersed in solo projects and fatherhood, carving out a life defined by balance
rather than burnout. His music now leans toward blues, soul, and introspection, a far cry from the anthemic, high-gloss sound of Bon Jovi's peak. Jon, meanwhile, has steered the band toward a more adult, contemporary style, moving away from the hair metal bombast of the past. Their creative goals no longer align, and forcing them together for the sake of legacy risks flattening the authenticity both have worked hard to preserve. Health is another big deal. Jon's vocal recovery has not left him much to work with physically, and a high-octane reunion show, as in the old days, would not just be exhausting but perhaps damaging. Sambora too says he has become more discerning by not taking performance opportunities that are not good for his personal health or long-term well-being because of the strenuousness of the tour. Even if one could deal with logistics, chemistry remains an issue. Decades of emotional baggage do not just disappear with a handshake and a sound check. Establishing that kind of trust takes more than just nostalgia. It requires a labor neither side appears eager to do. Even if it were going to be repaired, such an eventuality may end up hurting the very legacy such a reunion would celebrate. The power of Bon Jovi's tale lies in what they did together in that prime time, and not in trying to resurrect for the sake of reminiscence. Since then, Jon and Richie have carved out new lives for themselves, and a reunion may serve the fans more than the musicians themselves. For now, that dream remains just that. An idea that, whilst exciting, has little traction in the realities of where these men are today. Sometimes the myth of a reunion is stronger than what the real thing would ever be. Long ago, veterans in the music industry warned against reunions based on little else than sentimental motivations of fans, and Bon Jovi is not an exception. Producer Bob Rock noted in a 2023 Rolling Stone panel discussion on legacy acts that some reunions work because there's something new to say, others collapse under the weight of what they used to be. Ironically, it carries all the more relevance for Bon Jovi, the cultural credentials of which were once cemented at a very specific time in history. Audiences tend to want the emotional time capsule instead of those real aging people behind it. So it is not just logistical and personal, it is psychological as well. The version of the band that most fans romanticized falls in the years of prime MTV and arena anthems, but bringing that cast back together in 2024 might unveil the inevitable changes that age and life bring. And while the spotlight shifted, Richie found something far more lasting off stage. Legacy through a new lens. In the years since his departure from Bon Jovi, Richie Sambora has gradually reshaped his identity, not just as a guitarist, but as a father, solo artist, and man committed to healing. In his 2024 interviews with Yahoo Entertainment and the New York Post, Sambora spoke openly about going through therapy, reflecting on past decisions, and finding peace outside the whirlwind of rock stardom. He admitted to past mistakes, including the way he left the band, but emphasized that those decisions were part of a larger journey towards self-preservation. For Sambora, stepping away wasn't just an exit from a band, it was an intentional move toward rediscovering who he was beyond the stage. Much of his focus now is on family, particularly his daughter Ava, whose modeling and acting career has begun to blossom. Sambora has often expressed how proud he is of her, and how his decision to leave Bon Jovi was heavily influenced by a desire to be a present father. He's also quietly continued his solo work, occasionally performing at charity events and teasing unreleased music. While he's no longer filling stadiums on a nightly basis, his creative spirit remains alive, and it's channeled into projects that bring him joy on a personal level, rather than pressure from global expectations. Sambora, while regretting how things ended with Bon Jovi, maintains a sense of pride in the music they made together. He often speaks of the historic run they had, how their songs changed lives, and the legacy they created together. More recent interviews indicate that while the two have gone their separate ways, Sambora still holds fondness for the band and Jon Bon Jovi. "We built something amazing," he pondered, "that history can never be taken away." The truthfulness and humility of Sambora have been a fitting background to his legacy, endearing him even further to fans who have been with him since the very beginning. To many, Richie Sambora remains the emotional and musical counterpart to Jon Bon Jovi, the bluesy soul behind the band's bombastic energy. His harmonies, songwriting, and guitar work helped define an era, and while he may have exited without a proper goodbye, his influence is felt in every note on the band's biggest hits. He's ghosted maybe, but certainly not forgotten. Sambora's evolution shows that legacies aren't just what you do at your prime. They're also what you do with your life when the limelight fades. Sambora's post-Bon Jovi paths lay alongside a historical transition among legacy rockers who have started to assess the meaning of success in a much more human way, more philosophically. Sambora, like Dave Grohl stepping into mentorship, or Bruce Springsteen going into memoir and Broadway, has chosen to embrace raw authenticity instead of mere spectacle. In an interview in 2024, he said he had been inspired by musicians such as Eric Clapton and Bonnie Raitt, who discovered deeper meaning in quieter moments in their careers. "It's not about being loud anymore, it's about being real." This assertion enabled him to take back control of his story and resonate with a generation of followers who sought emotional truth rather than sold-out venues. His evolution is not about the riffs and the radio hits anymore, it's about strength, reinvention, and the courage to grow up on his terms. If you found this story as eye-opening as we did, make sure to like the video, drop a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more untold truths from the world of rock. Got a favorite Bon Jovi memory or Richie solo moment? We want to hear it. And don't go anywhere. Click the next video on your screen to keep the music and the stories going.